welcome to the Scholar Progenium. Today we're going to be doing a bolt action tactics video on the Stug. Now the Stug is a very interesting vehicle. It's almost ubiquitous with World War II German armoured vehicles, but you have to just have a certain mindset as a Stug commander, and I'm going to share that mindset with you today so you can too get the most juice out of your Stug and start taking heads and become a tank ace on the bolt action battlefield. Now, first of all, the Stug has some interesting history behind it. So, as I said, over 10,000 units produced, and it was first sort of conceptualised just after World War One, and it was first sort of a few units were made and tested, and I think around 1935, and it was in the German army. There was two of them, I think, certainly by 1937, 1939, and so they started cranking them out. And in bolt action, the A to the E essentially work the same, and then the F, the G, and the H essentially also work the same with a couple of slight variations. Now, many famous tank commanders started off their careers in the Stug, and you know, it was just a very well loved unit that caused a lot of mayhem on every front, from Africa to the Eastern Front, to Western Europe and Germany, and just throughout the war. It was just continuously upgraded, perfected, and then when they got to the Stug G, which was the final model, they produced over 8,000 of those. So there's about 2,000 produced throughout the first years of the war, and then from 1944 they just churned. They got it right, and it didn't have a turret. It was easy to produce. Obviously they're under a lot of strain at that point in time, and they just cranked out the Stug at over 8,000 of them. So really cool unit. Now, how does it operate on the battlefields of bolt action? Well, it's an Armour 9 vehicle, and it's a tracked vehicle, so of course you only get a 9-inch move on an advance and one pivot, or 18 inches on a run, but then you're not shooting anything. Now, you know, not having a turret is a big downside, and that's undeniable, but there are ways around it, and it's all about your mindset. And a lot of people compare it to, say, a Sherman or a Cromwell, because they're the same points. It's 230 points, and for that 230 points you get no turret, your tracked vehicle, so slightly limited in certain realms of movement, but more options in other areas because you can go through barricades and stuff like that, just ram straight through them. And you get a heavy anti-tank gun. Now, this loadout interacts in a very interesting way where you can actually get a lot of juice out of it, and I'm going to talk to you about that now. So the Armour 9, you know, I'm not a massive fan of Armour 9 vehicles. I either like to go lighter Armour 8 or heavier Armour 10 on the rare occasion, because I feel like 9 is a sort of middle ground that doesn't benefit either way. You can't just shrug off anti-tank weaponry. You've got to be aware of it and be very cautious around it, sort of, especially medium anti-tank guns and above, which are very common. But you've not got the armour to sort of just shrug that off, but you also cost enough in terms of points that you're having to make certain sacrifices elsewhere in the list, which means that you have to keep it alive, which sort of leans into more conservative ways of fighting. But the Stug, because of its low profile, that actually does come in game terms, and it does mean that you can sort of hide behind a wall and then ram through it, or claim cover that other vehicles couldn't. So a Sherman might drive up to a bit of cover, like a hedge or something like that, and not actually be covered enough to claim cover, you know, be covering half the vehicle or more. Whereas the Stug, because it is such a low profile, it is often very easy to claim cover with the Stug. So that was a benefit that was part of the requirements when they designed the Stug was they didn't want it to be taller than a man at standing height. Now, I'll say a couple of quick words about the Panzer III, the Stug 3 A to E, which is that it has a light howitzer. Now, depending on time period that you're playing in certain theatres, that's perfectly acceptable. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily take it myself very often, and as soon as the Stu 42 becomes available in terms of time periods, I would always take that, and I'll do another video on the Stu 42 separately, because I think it warrants a video in its own right. But the light howitzer with an armour 9, I mean, for me, it's not an option I would personally take because it's too much armour and not enough firepower. But 160 points, getting that HE on the table in early war period, you can't complain. Now, the main thing that we need to talk about, the sort of one that we're all talking about because the Finns can use it and it's just so ubiquitous, is the Stug 3 F to G. Now, there's not much difference between them. They're all 230 points, as I mentioned previously. On the G and the H, you can take shirts and armoured skirts, which I don't bother because I think it's 10 points. It gives you a better benefit against the shape charge if you're being shot in the sides. But for me, it doesn't come up enough to warrant paying the 10 points for it. That's a spotter for my mortar or something like that. So how do you use the Stug 3, the Classico one might say, with the Armour 9 and the heavy anti-tank gun? Well, the trick is this heavy anti-tank gun, it has the same anti-infantry potential as a Sherman or a Cromwell or any sort of other common allied tank, and that's a 2-inch template with pen +2. Now, we sort of sing the praises of the Sherman and that kind of thing because it has that 75mm cannon, which allows it to fire both a medium anti-tank shell and the 2-inch template, the light howitzer template, which is an effective HE template. When I was talking about the Stug 3 earlier models, I'm not dissing that template ability at all. It's very good. And so don't just think of the Stug as an anti-vehicle unit. It can work absolutely wonders against non-vehicle targets. And your opponent will almost not take this into consideration. They're not going to ignore the Stug. Obviously, they know it's there. But they might think they can get away with putting a unit within 36 inches of the Stug in light cover, and you can just fire at that unit and you'll hit it on a 4-up, because if you're within 36 inches you're within half range, and if it's in light cover you've not moved, you'll hit it on a 4-up, and a 2-inch template, it's like hitting something with a mortar. You'll probably hit 3 guys. If that's a unit of veterans, you'll be wounding them on 3s. If it's a unit of inexperienced or regulars, then you'd be wounding them on 2s. And obviously you get your D3 pins, which is a shot we all like to make. Many of us have chanced a 6-up on a mortar in desperate times to try and take out a unit that's really pressing on us. And so the Stug has that ability just inbuilt. It's very, very effective at taking on veterans and infantry. And, it can take those shots and hit them reliably because it's got that decent range, and that's because of that long range. So it's not just 30 inches, it's 36 inches. So it's actually better than the Sherman or the Cromwell with the 75mm cannon, or the 6-pounder. Now, on top of that, it has the sweet spot when it comes to vehicle duels. And this is the other part of the mindset that you really need to be aware of. So if you're facing off against a very common allied setup, which is a 9-up medium tank armour with a medium anti-tank gun with a pen of 5 +5, you sort of think naturally you haven't got that much of an advantage because you've only got the +1 pen at pen +6. But actually it's a bit deeper than that, because if with a bit of practice you can get really good at manoeuvring this vehicle so that you're in that perfect sweet spot between just over 30 inches and 36 inches. And if you're in that sweet spot, that is just the absolute killer window of death, because you will be shooting without a penalty for being at plus over half range, and that penalty for being at over half range also affects the armor penetration of anti-tank guns in their duels. And what that means is you will be penning on a 6, you'll be adding +6 to your pen, which means against an armor 9 vehicle, very common setup, you'll be glancing on a 3 and then penning on a 4, 5 or 6, which, as we've said before, penning on a 4, 5 or 6 on a coin toss is a really nice position to be in, and not a nice position to be in for your opponent. Your opponent, meanwhile, will be over half range because their range of their cannon is only 60 inches. So at between 30 and 36, you are within half range, but they are not. And that actually takes an armor penetration value away from their main cannon, meaning that it's essentially just a light anti-tank gun, which is pen +4. And against your armor class, that means that to glance, they would need a 5, and to pen, they would need a 6. So you're penning on a 4, 5 or 6, which is very 50-50, very likely, so to speak, in terms of bolt action anyway. Whereas they're penning on a 6, which is not a good position to be in. Now they may have a little more maneuverability, but that's sort of the final pillar in this whole deal, in this whole Stug mindset. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you can move and maneuver into that ideal spot where you've got a little bit of cover, ideally light cover, or obviously ideally heavy, and you can make use of that cover, as we've said, because of the profile of the vehicle. And you want to make sure that you are setting yourself up for a duel over a couple of shots. So maybe that first shot you'll have to move, and you're eyeing it up, and hopefully you've kept your brain switched on, and you've got a good idea of what the ranges are going to be when you're taking that shot, in terms of keeping an eye on the range of other shots that have taken place over the course of the battle. It also means that heavy tanks can't just brazenly dominate the battlefield. It's like that armor 10. That can be a real problem to face, and it can be a real pain in the neck taking on one of those heavy vehicles. But with the Stug, you're in the game there. They can't just do whatever they want. It's a bit more cat and mouse, and the hunter can very much become the hunted. So that would be my sort of 3 tips for using the Stug. So whether you're using it as Finns, whether you're using it as Germans, I would highly recommend cracking the Stug out and earning that respect as many other German field tank commanders did. Cut your teeth with the Stug, and then obviously fighting with a tank with a turret will become child's play. So it makes you a good tank commander overall. So that's basically the Stug. That's everything you need to know. So hopefully you'll have a bit of luck out there, and you'll have some fun with your Stug. You'll crack it back out, dust it off if you've used it in the past and become frustrated with it. So I hope I've helped you there. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you found it entertaining. This has been the Scholar Progenium. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.